So our objectives for today. So by the end of this presentation, my goal is for you to understand the rationale for focusing on the needs of vulnerable parents when providing services to children. I'd like you to be able to identify the ways in which trauma, mental illness, stress, and parental developmental disability impact parents and parenting. Obtain tools for working with vulnerable parents, and understand the importance of attending to our own feelings when working with these parents. So to start off, who are vulnerable parents? So this is a term that I came up with to talk about a subset of parents that are often challenging for service providers to work with. So for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to talk about vulnerable parents as parents who have mental illness or challenged by mental health issues, parents who are impacted by trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, and parents who have their own developmental disability. And so why should we focus on vulnerable parents? Well, the main reason is when you think about the purpose for this grant and these presentations, we're focusing on improving the social and emotional development of children from the ages of 0 to 5, in particular regional center clients. And so it's helpful to understand the impact of parental mental illness, trauma, and parental developmental disability on children. So in a study from 2016, they found that 7.2% of children have at least one caregiver with poor mental health. And I believe that that number may be a little closer to 10% now. And what they found were children with one or more caregivers with poor mental health were 4 times as likely to have poor general health and twice as likely to have one or more mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder when compared to children with all caregivers with good mental health. And the authors recommended the providers support children's healthy development by promoting a family-centered approach to health, which incorporates caregivers' health and well-being. And that's really what we're talking about today. And so a little more information. A study from 2015 found that parental PTSD was associated with child distress and behavior problems. And another study from 2016 found that children of parents with PTSD were easily dysregulated or distressed at a young age, and at an older age were reported to face more difficulties in their psychosocial development than children of parents without symptoms of PTSD. Interestingly enough, the majority of the research on childhood outcomes of parents with developmental disabilities are primarily focused on negative outcomes. So the percentage of children who end up in foster care, the percentage of families in which child welfare is involved, whether or not the parents are capable of being parents. And that is not going to be the focus of this presentation. Instead, we're talking about how we can work effectively with these parents when we are, generally, most of the people in this room, the goal is to provide services for the child. But in order to do that, we have to work with the parents. And in particular, when a parent is challenged in this way, having skills to work effectively with those parents helps us with our outcome. And as I have here, our goal is to improve the social and emotional development of children from birth to age 5. So addressing the needs of vulnerable parents will help us to achieve that goal. So I don't love this quote, but I wanted to include it because it tells you a little bit about the experience of a parent who has challenges like mental illness, developmental disability, a history of trauma. And the quote is, "Parents with their words, attitudes, and actions possess the ability to bless or curse the identities of their children." It's pretty black and white thinking, and pretty strong words, especially if you're a parent who has a lot of struggles of your own? Am I going to curse the identity of my children? So my answer would be no, but we'll talk about that later. So I wanted to go over, I'm not going to dwell on the aspects of mental illness and trauma in parents, but I wanted to kind of highlight some of the symptoms that you may see that may influence or get in the way of parenting, but that also may show up in your meetings with parents where you're potentially teaching new skills, you're trying to help a parent understand what's happening with their child to formulate a plan going forward. And these are some of the symptoms you may see that may cause some challenges. So some symptoms of mental illness can make it more challenging for the parent to fulfill their duties and participate in services for their children. And so in a parent with depression, either diagnosed or not, some of the things you'll see is poor sleep, poor self-care, poor concentration, reduced organizational ability, lack of interest in things that previously were enjoyable, suicidal ideation, and excessive guilt. In individuals with anxiety, you can see crippling fears of panic and overwhelm, excessive focus on fears about the future, challenges with decision-making due to high levels of fear and panic attacks. Bipolar disorder, you may see symptoms consistent with depression, as we discussed already, or manic symptoms, which can look like reduced need for sleep, euphoria, an inability to sustain concentration, disorganization, and just an aside, diagnoses like bipolar disorder and also psychosis really need to be treated with medication. So if a parent is on medication and perhaps has stopped taking it, that's a real cause for concern. And lastly, psychosis. So in psychosis, this can be schizophrenia. This can also be, you can see this in a manic episode that is has really progressed. You can even see psychotic symptoms in depression. You're going to see delusions, things that aren't true or aren't real, seeing or hearing things that aren't there. Beliefs that are not based in reality. And again, these are diagnoses that must be treated with medication. And I just wanted to highlight some crisis behaviors or symptoms that you may see in individuals with mental illness. So suicidal ideation, thoughts of harming their children, seeing or hearing things that are not there, strange beliefs that have no basis in reality, especially when those beliefs are potentially causing a risk to safety. And then a manic episode, so little to should be no sleep, pressured speech. When a manic episode gets to the phase of starting to develop psychotic thinking, not sleeping at all, these are crisis situations, and encourage you, if you're a service provider serving these clients, to access county mental health crisis or first responders. If the child is a regional center client, you can also access the CBEM hotline through the regional center after hours line, and this is something that we could help support you through this as well. Come on, there we go. Trauma. So remember that trauma is in the eye of the beholder. If the incident was traumatic to the individual, if they're reporting that this was a traumatic experience, the result is trauma. You never want to doubt the veracity of another person's trauma. We all come into this world with different experiences, different levels of sensitivity, and different experiences in our early childhood. And that can help to shape and define what our body and mind experiences trauma. Remember too that trauma can stem from multiple sources and can occur again and again. We call that chronic trauma. Parents with a trauma history may experience some of the following. So re-experiencing or reenactments. And this is something that you may see with children, caregivers, and yourselves as service providers and family, etc. This is going to look like the parent responding and acting in a way that is not necessarily congruent with what's happening in the moment. You can see high levels of emotional reaction to a situation that is not warranting that kind of reaction. A parent expressing beliefs or ideas about why something is happening that aren't necessarily based in current reality. Some other things that you may see are signs of avoidance and signs of arousal. So I talked about this a little bit. Big emotions that seem out of proportion to the matter at hand. And lastly, parents with developmental disabilities. So historically, these groups have experienced high levels of discrimination and judgment in society. So this is just individuals, adults especially, with developmental disabilities. Discrimination, judgment, and notions of what they can and can't do. These experiences are magnified when individuals with developmental disabilities become parents. In our society, we have strong feelings about who should and should not be a parent and what it takes to be a parent. Individuals with developmental disabilities have a right to have children and have a right to raise families. Their needs are complex and often include support for independent living skills and parenting. And remember too that each parent is different. They all have their own strengths, their own challenges, and their own needs. And the best way to understand what the parent needs is to get to know them. Understanding the parent will help you to know where to start. Another strategy that can be helpful is to focus on the individual's parenting desires and goals along with the needs of the parent's child. And keep in mind too that with a lot of parents with developmental disabilities, you may see that they lack in confidence in their parenting skills. They can potentially present as defensive due to experiences of being criticized, interaction with child welfare. We have worked with a number of parents with developmental disabilities at CBEM, and many of them have already had experiences with CPS or CWS. And there is an expectation in the back of their minds often that that's coming. And so any attempts you make to help them think differently about how they're caring for their child can result in that defensiveness because of that fear. The defensiveness comes from a sense of fear of losing their children. Come on. There we go. So building a relationship with one of these vulnerable parents. The first thing to remember is that your relationship with the vulnerable parent may take time. It may take a long time, especially when you're encountering a parent who perhaps has had experience, law enforcement coming to their home, CPS or CWS being involved. If they've had experiences with past service providers who have not taken a person-centered approach to the work. Parents who are left feeling less than, like they're bad parents, are going to have difficulty building a relationship. Trust is key. And remember that trust is built by showing that you're dependable, so be on time, be in good communication with the parent, being truthful, and showing that you can take responsibility. This is, I think, one of the biggest aspects of rapport building that I talk to my staff about, and I really take it to heart. Our clients especially clients who are regional center clients, are used to feeling less than, wrong. People are smarter than they are. And sometimes this can take this can present as potentially a service provider making a mistake. We all make mistakes. I make them every day. But the service provider not taking responsibility, potentially getting defensive. I didn't do that. You will build trust with your clients if you can own up to your mistakes, own up to your part in the situation that led to a disruption in that rapport, a disruption in the working relationship. Empathy. It's all about empathy. Your client needs to know that you get them. And that takes time. And I know for a lot of you, you're on a schedule. You're a behavioral aide or you're a behaviorist. You're in there to implement your plan. You've got things you need to teach. You've got data you need to collect. And now, as I'm saying, you've got to take this time to build a relationship. This is important, and you're setting the stage for success down the road. Understand where they're coming from. Understand their life. Meet the parent where they are rather than where you think they should be. And this can be difficult, especially I think about in our work. I could imagine as a behavioral agency, you're thinking about where you want the client to be when it's time to transition or close the case. Focus on where they are now. Don't focus on the journey, focus on the now. Remember your biases. Maybe I had an experience in my past where I had a parent with mental illness. And I've developed a belief that parents with mental illness are not good parents. I need to check that and leave it at the door. It doesn't mean it's not going to come up, and we're going to talk about that later because it definitely does come up for all of us. Offer resources, but only in the context of requests for help. When you read about working with vulnerable parents, as this group that I'm talking about, a lot of what you'll read about are kind of generic suggestions. Listen, empathize, offer resources, offer support groups, and all of that is great. But when we're talking about the nitty-gritty of building relationships, be careful about offering too many resources. You don't want your client to feel like you're trying to fix them, because they don't need to be fixed. They need to be understood. And lastly, one of my favorite sayings from my previous life as a psychotherapist: individuals need to feel understood before they can understand. They need to feel like you get them and you get their experience before they can start to think, get curious, and learn. Stress and big emotions. So what am I talking about when I talk about big emotions? So big emotions are emotional states in which the individual is completely overwhelmed by the intensity of feelings. And what does it look like? The individual may not be able to engage in rational discussions. They have an inability to organize thoughts. Their emotions are driving their actions. Sometimes in situations where a parent or a client is kind of in that big emotional state, I'll see people say, well, what's wrong? Or if the client is particularly worried about something that's coming up, well, I already told you that's not going to happen. Those kinds of interventions are not going to work because the person is not in a space where they can think rationally and they can engage their critical thinking brain in order to make decisions and decide how to proceed and to be able to get a handle on their feelings. The other thing you see when someone is in a state of big emotion is fight, flight, or freeze. We're going to talk about that in a little minute. And the last thing is to remember that vulnerable parents can experience big emotions related to their mental illness, should be trauma history, or history of discrimination due to their developmental disability. And it's not always clear that there's a link there. A client becomes highly escalated, very upset, and you have no understanding as to what the trigger was. And it's natural to want to ask, well, what happened? Well, why are you upset? I'm encouraging you to take a step back from that and think about it a little bit differently. We're going to do that now. So fight, flight, or freeze, and the escalation cycle. The fight or flight response plays a critical role in how we deal with stress and danger in our environment. When we're under threat, the response prepares the body to either fight or flee. The need to survive is instinctual. So I'm sure many of you have heard the analogy of being chased by a dangerous animal. Our body ramps up and goes into fight or flight in order to protect ourselves. The challenge is sometimes our body triggers, the fight or flight response is triggered when it's not really necessary. This is particularly true for individuals who have a trauma history. And it can be confusing for the individual. It can definitely be confusing for children, loved ones, caregivers, support people, and frustrating as well. So here we have fight or flight response can be triggered by both real and imaginary threats. In addition to imaginary, I would say past threats, or past threats that are triggered by that trauma history, trauma response. So in response to acute stress, both real or imagined, the body's sympathetic nervous system is activated, resulting in a chain reaction of effects. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dr. Daniel Siegel. He's an amazing clinician who talks a lot about the brain and child development. I'm hoping that I have my sound hooked up. If you can't hear it, please let me know and I'll fix it. So here we go.
No sound.
Thanks, Denise. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna share again, share sound. All right. Oh goodness, what happened to my, here we go. Let's start over again, Dan. All right, here we go.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life. One of the most rewarding.
Let's see if I can get to our next slide. There we go. So if I'm sure a lot of you have seen this already, this is a really useful tool for helping children, but also helping adults, parents, caregivers, clinicians understand what happens when we lose it. We flip our lid. When fear, danger, or intense emotions overwhelm our amygdala, our prefrontal cortex goes offline and we flip our lid. That's why sometimes it's so hard to make thoughtful decisions when we are very upset. When brains are overwhelmed like this, they need a break to reflect and reconnect. And this is really important because if you're working with a parent who, potentially has a big emotion cycle that we're talking about, perhaps with you during a session, with a child, when you're working with the parent and the child, it's important to remember that that parent is not reachable from a cognitive perspective when their lid is flipped. And I wanted to show you this other visual. So this is for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, this is the escalation cycle. This is something we use a lot at CBEM, and it shows the stages of an escalation. So oftentimes when we at CBEM talk about escalation, we're talking about physical aggression, verbal aggression, situations that are getting out of control to the point where physical health and safety may be an issue. But this escalation cycle is useful too when thinking about big emotions, fight or flight. There's a process where it ramps up and then a process where it ramps down. But the part that I want to highlight for you is this red line that I drew down here, not quite as beautifully as I would have liked. But this red line addresses cognition. So as you can see, when we are at our most escalated, we're at the peak of our big emotions, we are least likely to be able to make meaning, to be tuned in, to make decisions based on experience and knowledge, to be able to rationalize, to be able to answer a question like, well, why are you upset? What's going on? Why are you doing that? None of that is possible in those moments. So what do? Strategies for managing big emotions in vulnerable parents. The first thing to do, and this is for us, the clinician, the individual who's there with this parent, take a deep breath, because these situations are hard and they often bring up a lot of feelings for us. The first thing you can try is say in a calm voice, how can I help you? What do you need right now? We call this the help strategy. Take a minute. See if the parent can respond. They may be able to respond. God, I just need to get out of here. Well, why don't we go and see if we can take a walk? Grandma's here with the baby. Let's go take a walk. Do you want me to come with you, or do you want to go on your own? You may ask, how can I help you? What do you need? and they may not be able to respond. They may be so agitated. Let's say they're pacing, breathing very quickly. Parent doesn't respond. How can I help you? The next thing you can do is we call prompt. Try prompting an incompatible behavior. So what that means is it's a behavior that you cannot do at the same time as a behavior that the parent is engaging in at that moment. So for example, my parent who is pacing, why don't you sit down? Come sit down next to me. You can't pace and sit down at the same time. Parent is breathing quickly. Hey, let's take a deep breath. Four beats in, 4 beats out. Prompt an incompatible behavior. And if you then see that the parent appears to be calming down, try help again. What do you need right now? And then see what occurs after this. The last strategy is the wait strategy. So when all else fails, remind the parent that you're there, give them some space, let them know when you're ready, I'm here. Perhaps if it's needed, maybe go in the other room. Give the parent some space and you keep breathing. Don't rush in to try to fix it. The parent is going to de-escalate. If kids are around or other people around, try to keep them separate, engage them in another activity. We want the parent to be able to calm down. You can try prompting the incompatible behavior, asking what they need. And hopefully you'll see that decline in those big emotions, and then you can move forward. So I want to talk about working in partnership. We talked a little bit about building relationships with vulnerable parents. But in order to work effectively with them, you must build a partnership. So not surprisingly, the most important part of this is building and maintaining rapport. So building rapport can take an unknown amount of time. Some parents can build rapport quite quickly and you're able to really build a good working relationship with them. Others may take time, especially if they have had poor experiences with previous service providers. They've had experience with law enforcement, CPS or CWS, or they're naturally suspicious, potentially due to a history of trauma or anxiety disorders. Meet them where they are and continue to work to build that rapport. Foster curiosity rather than telling the parent what to do. And this is a hard one because especially if we're there to teach parenting skills or we're a teacher and we're trying to build a relationship with the parent to help address the child's educational needs. It's hard to have the patience to help the parent get to where they need to be in order to understand what you're trying to teach or encourage. Help the parent to become curious about their child. In a previous presentation that we had with the, I don't remember the name of the program now, but it used to be called the Infant Parent Project at UCSF. They talked about reflective capacity. So the ability to recognize mental states, feelings, and thoughts in ourselves and others. So encourage that in your parents. I wonder what the child is thinking right now. I wonder what they're feeling. What do you think we could do? What might help? We also want to create an environment where you and the parent can give each other feedback. This is crucial. The parent needs to be able to give you feedback if something's not working. Look, I don't really like how you're talking to me right now. It kind of feels like you're talking to me like a baby. You may want to respond, I'm not treating you like a baby. No, wave off. The goal is to Validate that person's experience. Whether or not you intended to treat them like a baby, that is their felt experience, and they need to get that you get that. Can you tell me more about what I said that made you feel like I was treating you like a baby? Thank you for telling me that. You're creating an environment where you can give each other feedback, which will hopefully then allow for you to be able to give the parent feedback. And if you've built a strong enough rapport, be able to give them difficult feedback in a way that they can accept, internalize, and act on. And lastly, find opportunities for the parent to teach you something. Certainly, they're going to be teaching you about their child. They're the expert in their child. So let them teach you. If they have a hobby that they're interested in, let them teach you something. This is true, I think, for most of these vulnerable parents, but particularly for parents with developmental disabilities. They often are in the position where they don't know something. They're always having to learn. They're always feeling less than. And finding those opportunities for that parent to teach me something, it gives them a sense of mastery, and it gives them a sense of self-esteem and self-worth. So I talked in the beginning, we're person-centered here. So a lot of what we've been talking about are coming from a person-centered approach, but I wanted to address it directly. So what does it look like to help and build relationships from a person-centered approach? I meet my client where they're at, without expectations, without preconceived notions, without judgment. It is important that I listen to my client and be mindful of the effects of having no positive control in their life. So especially with clients with developmental disabilities, they have had a lot of experiences in their life where they have not had control. This would also be true if you've got parents who've had experiences with CWS or CPS. Even sometimes clients with a pretty significant trauma history. There is an experience of feeling helpless, feeling like they don't have control, and they need to know that you get that. I respectfully address significant issues of health or safety while supporting choice. And these, this is where it can get a little tricky, because you must address these issues, but you want to do it from a position of not blaming, not making the client wrong. It's a conversation. It's an opportunity to help the client to be curious about what's happening, help the client understand why something is a health and safety issue, and how can you work together to come up with a different solution. I make space for understanding my client and their goals. This is important because this work takes time. Building a relationship with a vulnerable parent is going to take time. And if you make the space for it, it will pay off, usually. Our goals are based on what is important to the parent. So we want to make sure that although we're coming in with goals based on the referral from the regional center, the referral from the school, referral from other agencies, bring those goals with you and talk to the parent about it. Rework those goals in a way that they are addressing things that are important to the parent. And then inquire about what the parent needs. How does the parent understand the challenges that are happening? Everything that happens in the treatment with the child or with the family, the parent needs to understand what's happening. And sometimes that means it's going to take time. But if you're bringing them along and fostering that curiosity and that inquiry, they're going to be more on board, and the changes and strategies that you're implementing will have a higher likelihood of lasting. Addressing barriers. What to do when it's just not working. And it happens. We often at CBEB will get referrals for clients where they have services and it's just not working out. So I think the best approach to start with is to talk about the challenges directly with the parent in a relational manner. And by that, I mean, you and I, our relationship, we're having trouble achieving your goals. Why do you think that is? Are there things that I'm doing that are making it hard for this to happen? Beware of the desire to point fingers. This is not working because you're not doing your homework. This is not working because you're still not back on your medications. That is most likely not going to help. If those things are true, we want to get to them. But making the client wrong or blaming the client is not going to preserve the relationship, and it's not going to allow you to continue to work together and strengthen that relationship. In fact, having these open conversations where we can both, I as service provider and you as vulnerable parent, can take responsibility and talk about how we've succeeded and how we haven't succeeded, can help us to co-create a plan going forward that's going to be structurally more sound and have a firmer grounding in trust and empathy. If that doesn't work, get consultation. Talk to other service providers, members of the circle of support. If you're working in an agency, talk to your colleagues, talk to your supervisor. Yeah, if it's a regional center client, talk to the service coordinator, get some feedback and some ideas. I really like going to individuals who have worked successfully with this parent. So if another agency is actually doing pretty well with the parent, talk to them, find out what's working, and see if you can potentially bring some of that into your relationship with the parent. I don't want to plug our services, but situations where a parent is just not able to follow through with the services that you're providing can potentially be a reason for referral to CBEM if the child or the parent is an RCRC client, and you would contact the service coordinator to talk about that. We don't have magic wands, and so I can't promise that we can get the parent re-engaged in treatment, but it's a possibility. And above all else, and this is something I preach to my staff and I think is very important, is to maintain non-attachment to outcome. There are situations where it's just not going to work. And making sure that we do not stay attached to the outcome that we desire helps us to avoid situations where we may be acting out on our own feelings. And the client's going to feel that. And we're going to talk about this in just a minute. Managing ourselves. So this is my favorite part of the presentation. It doesn't really get talked about a lot in our field. So by managing ourselves, I'm talking about understanding our feelings, beliefs, judgments, and biases that come up in our day-to-day work with clients and their families, and what to do with it. So little quote here, self-care is essential. Put your own oxygen mask on first. This is, of course, what we will tell our vulnerable parents too. Put their own oxygen mask on first. But for us as service providers, we've got to make sure that we're cared for and we're on top of our needs before we're putting ourselves in there to provide services and really get in there with these challenging clients. So our feelings, why are our feelings even a thing? Working with vulnerable parents is difficult, and the work often will bring up our own personal feelings. Sometimes these feelings can be helpful, but often they are challenging for us to manage. And I'm hoping, I know we don't have a ton of time, but I'd love for some of you to put in chat some examples of feelings that have come up for you when working with vulnerable parents. And also, if you care to, how did those feelings impact your work with the parent and or the child? Maybe Denise, if you see anything, you could shout it out.
Yeah. Let's see. Actually, it's quite all right, you guys, to go ahead and share your feelings here if you'd like.
Or if you'd like to do it, come off mute, that's fine too.
Or hypothetically, how you might feel and why. Empathy. I'm seeing empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Compassion. Yeah. Others. Nervous for our parents.
Mm-hmm.
Frustration.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been there at one time or another.
Absolutely. Myself included.
Relatable. Just patience.
Mm-hmm.
Sad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, evoke those sad feelings. Understanding of the situation. I'm kind of going back into that sympathy or empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes feel. Okay. Concern.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed.
Yes, that was the one that was on my mind as well.
Absolutely. And motivated to act quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you all
good.
for sharing.
Yeah, those are some great ones. And I think, what I want to say about these feelings is that are all important. The empathy, compassion is great. The overwhelm, fear, concern, the desire to work quickly is also great. But what matters is what we do and how we act or don't act on those feelings. And so next slide is, whose feelings are these anyway? So I'm going to talk just a little bit about this therapy term called countertransference. So with countertransference, we unknowingly transfer or project our unresolved thoughts, feelings, and emotions onto a client. This happens to all of us every day when we are reminded of someone in the behavior of another. This is normal. Awareness is key to preventing ourselves from acting on these feelings. I can think of an example from a previous case that we had. We had a client who was watching one of those teenage mom shows, Teen Mom, I don't remember what it was called. And she was with a staff member. And the client was making comments about the, teen mom, she shouldn't have had children. This is crazy. And the staff member got very upset and later disclosed that she had had a child when she was very young. It may, now we're speculating, have felt to her in that moment that this client was talking directly about her experience. She wasn't. She had no idea that the staff member had had a child when she was young. But this was unresolved in her, and it triggered some strong feelings of hers. So what we're hoping to do in these moments is, as a staff member, service provider, care provider, catch it. Oh, wow, this is really upsetting me that she's saying these things about teen moms, but don't act on it. Remember, it's normal. Everybody does this every single day. Awareness is the key to preventing ourselves from acting on the feelings. So why do I need to focus on my own feelings? This is not therapy. Why do I need to do it? It's normal and human to experience our own countertransference feelings in response to others. Countertransference feelings are often big feelings. Case in point of the staff member, that was a big feeling for her. They can lead you to feel the need to fix something in the moment. I need to fix it right now. Tell the parent that what they're doing is wrong. Trying to force an outcome. Get into a debate or an argument with the parent. Make threats. If you don't do X, I will call Y, or I will do Y. There's force and energy behind these statements. And that's can be a way in which you can identify, whoa, something's going on here. I need to take a step back. So how do we manage our feelings? We're here with the client, we're empathizing with them, we're attending to them, and then all of a sudden I've got my own feelings coming up. Remember that the feelings you're experiencing are yours. What the parent is saying or doing is not personal and is not a personal attack on you. I'm going to say it again. What the parent is saying or doing is not personal and is not a personal attack on you. I know that it may feel that way, and I've been there, but it's not. And one of the skills that can be useful in this moment is called the stop skill. This is actually a skill from dialectical behavior therapy. And it's a skill that we use at CBEM with some of our clients. I use it myself because it's a great way to interrupt these moments of strong feelings. So this is the stop skill. So stop. It's nice. It's a STOP. Stop. Do not just react. Stop. Freeze. Do not move a muscle. Your emotions may try to make you act or speak without thinking. Stay in control. Step 2, take a step back. Take a step back from the situation in your mind. Take a break. Let go. Take a deep breath. Do not let your feelings make you act or speak impulsively. Observe. Notice what's going on inside and outside you. What is the situation? What are your thoughts and feelings? What are others saying and doing? And then lastly, proceed mindfully. Act with awareness. Before deciding what to do, consider your thoughts and feelings, the situation, the other people's thoughts and feelings. Think about your goals. What will make the situation better or worse? Very helpful skill. So the other things that we can do to manage our feelings, especially when they're the type that are potentially going to damage the relationship, put us in a situation where we're going to be saying and doing things that are taking us off the track of having a person-centered approach to working with these vulnerable parents. We can use coping skills and self-management strategies. So stop skill is one of them. We can take a break and tell the parent, hey, you know what? I need to get a little fresh air. Can we take a 5-minute break? Go outside and get some air. And have a self-control plan. We're going to talk about that next. So creating a self-control plan. So the idea of a self-control plan comes from PROACT. Some of you may have done PROACT training in the past. So a self-control plan is a personal plan that identifies simple actions you can take to interrupt your own fight or flight response and regain control over your behavior. So to create your self-control plan, you want to think about strategies that have been helpful for you during moments of big emotion. Some examples may include taking deep breaths, grounding exercises, positive self-talk. You want to identify the 3 main strategies that you can use during moments of big emotions. And then you want to practice that plan so that it becomes second nature. Maybe you want to write it down. You've got it in your phone. You want it to be accessible quickly in your mind when you need it. Because remember, as we are getting triggered by those big emotions, our ability to use the parts of our brain that help us to make good choices, we have less access to those parts of our brain. Remember too that, As service providers and caregivers, our self is our tool. So you think about a construction worker, they use tools to build and they have to keep them clean and in good condition. In human service, our self is the tool. Your self is your tool. And so just like craftsmen, we have to be disciplined and do the same. We have to take care of ourselves and make sure that we have plans to manage ourselves when situations occur where we need to support ourselves. So a few resources for staff who work with vulnerable parents. So we talked about the self-control plan, mindfulness. I didn't want to go over mindfulness because if you watched Dr. Lucy's presentation a while back, a month or two ago, it was called Relieving Long-Term Stress in Children, Families, and Providers. She goes over mindfulness in that presentation and had a great video on it. You can create coping cards. There are smartphone apps. I recommend Calm. I really like Insight Timer as well. You can create affirmation cards for yourself. You can consider exploring your own personal therapy, and also look for support groups for caregivers and service providers. I think, at CBEM, we have a lot of time when we will case conference about clients. We also have weekly group supervision, and those are times when we can really talk to one another about the challenges that we're having, especially when we've got cases where our own countertransference is really getting in the way or complicating a situation. I'm putting together a separate PDF of resources that will also include some coping cards and some affirmation cards that can be used by service providers that work with these vulnerable families. And that's it. Thank you so much.